It's cold, it's miserable. We got a phone call to let us know that we had broken a mooring on the starboard quarter and that the boat had drifted out at an angle. Thankfully, it wasn't anything particularly risky or just heavy going. We had about to actually put the mooring back in place. And a big special thank you to Chris, who opted to come down and give me a hand in the freezing cold tonight to actually pull this together. Folks, Chris, who I can tell you, just also that Chris is a bit of a secret weapon in the galley. This man's a chef in his own right.
Well, I'm no Gordon Ramsay now, like.
But this isn't where the story began. Oh no, that would be far, far, far too easy. No, the story began with a phone call. There I was, minding my own business at the cottage in the middle of a storm, and the electricity has literally just gone off. And I get a phone call to tell me that StormDancer has broken mooring line. Not exactly the kind of thing that any boat owner wants to hear. So it's at that point you realise, well, if the power has gone off at the cottage in the middle of a storm, the chances are the power will come back on again on its own. Let's get down to the boat, see what's going on there, make sure the boat's safe. So CJ and I hop into the Jeep, out of the cottage and into the lane, and we encounter this. And of course it's at this point that you remember the chainsaw is in for servicing and the reciprocating saws are down on the boat. Fortunately I have a bow saw in the boot. And so the whole task begins to manually cut through the tree. That's just to be able to get out of the cottage, which I might add with 80-foot trees all around it, and one of them having just fallen within the last few minutes. Yeah, it's not a lot of comfort to be standing in a laneway with a tree that's freshly fallen and others swaying all around you, realizing that the most sensible thing you can do is cut through that tree to get out of there, sharpish. And then the other thought that goes through your head is, well, if the trees are coming down in the lane and the remaining trees around the cottage are all 80 foot high, how's the boat going to do with the mast in this storm? So, CJ and I set about taking turnabout to literally carve our way through this thing. Now, to be fair, it wasn't the biggest of all trees, but it was still an awful lot more tree than we needed on the occasion. Put yourself in the position that we were in. It's blowing a gale, you have a tree in the way, and you're in a hurry to go and check that the boat's alright. This is not the kind of thing you need to be up to. Tempers were stretched, shall we say. But it's one of those situations where there's nothing for it except just keep going. Although I must admit, there was that moment as a proud dad when you suddenly realise that your full-grown son is not only pulling trees apart, he's also invented a few new swear words that you'd never heard in your life in the process. But anyway, carving the tree up, there wasn't time to stop and think. It's just keep going, get it done, chop the thing up, carve your way through it, try not to get hit by any more trees coming down on top of our head. And it truly felt like it went on forever. But then you get into the part where you realize that trees are not very aerodynamic whenever you're trying to throw them over a hedge in a gale. And then we came to move the stump. Well, not so much the stump, but what remained of the trunk of this thing. And that took some grunt, I can tell you. What you can see here is us manhandling it, and there's still a fair third of the tree through the hedge that's fighting back against us. And between the wind blowing a gale, the trees around us creaking, and just sheer belligerence, we just managed to Well, basically forced the thing out of the way. And of course, you're remembering at this point, CJ and I have spent about an hour and a half to now trying to get this tree cleared. Thankfully, CJ found his reciprocating saw was actually in the boot of his own car, which helped us a little bit. But we are an hour and a half behind getting down to check on StormDancer, and there's absolutely no sign of the storm abating. And we can hear in the local area around us every so often the odd crash of another tree coming down, which isn't doing an awful lot for our confidence or our savoir-faire. I've actually chuckled at this bit as we were doing the edit, and CJ commented that there's a certain swagger of absolute resentment and impatience with Mother Nature that we're just not having it. But anyway, we make it out of the lane, and now it's time to head off to go check on StormDancer. And it didn't occur to us that we were in for quite the journey.
That's power lines?
Things like power lines down and
What do you reckon?
telegraph poles with the light still live, leaning over the road, dangling on the power cables, and it's a bit uncomfortable. And then there's the false sense of security that we've managed to get out of the cottage and out of the laneway.
Okay.
And all is good. We're out in the open until we come round the next corner.
Can we safely say there's a tree down there? What do you reckon?
I'll fit around.
That'll be a yes.
Eventually, we arrived down at the mooring. It's still howling a gale, but the tide is out. And we make an interesting discovery. StormDancer doesn't care. Completely unfazed. Now we have 6 mooring lines on StormDancer. Basically 1 fore, 1 aft, and 1 diagonally out from each corner. And as it turns out, we have lost a mooring line, and it has absolutely nothing to do with StormDancer being in any risk or at any danger. Quite simply, the stone cairn had been smashed up by the waves that we had a chain through to keep that corner of the mooring steady. So it just seemed very wise at that point to try and rebuild the thing. Well, when I say it seemed wise to try and rebuild the thing, it's worth remembering we weren't in any hurry to go rushing back to the cottage, especially not with 80-foot trees blowing about and Mother Nature throwing the odd tree trunk at us as we drove. So, we gathered up what remained of the mooring line to find the end of it, and then bring it back and rebuild the stone cairn that it was actually being used on shore for that Mediterranean style rear mooring. It had by this point been quite a long, exasperating day. Ultimately grateful for the fact that StormDancer was fine, but we had had enough, and by now we were hungry. And with a certain amount of belligerence, CJ made a decision. Dad, time for pizza. Finally, we get to have our pizza in peace. Without disruption. Well, finally we get to have our pizza. And we'll have to hate to get your pizza. We'll consider it soon.
There's a lot of crunchy pizzas.
So, following day, the time we got back down to the boat and to be able to tighten her in on the mooring, there's a couple of small jobs I decided to tackle. The storms had brought it home to me just how important it would be to beef up the hinges on the hatches on the rear hulls. And that became a little bit of a priority to get that done and out of the way. But before heading down to the boat, there was one more task that I mentioned in the last episode that I wanted to get sorted and ready to take down with me, and that was the Potbelly stove. So, jumping back in time, before heading down, I'd spent the day in the workshop. Percy the Potbelly stove. Percy's not the most complicated contraption. Percy, in effect, is little more than a tea pipe, with blanking plates, top, bottom, and front, and a bracket welded on to make a hinge to make the door. So Percy, so named by CJ when he was in the little off-road camper, has to be very probably the simplest Potbelly stove you could make for yourself. And naturally, taking Percy down and installing him temporarily into StormDancer had to be tested and tried. So a sheet of aluminium tucked in behind him just to keep the heat from the bulkhead. I had the decision that I want that in copper. And as it so happens, in the outhouse I have an old copper boiler that was given to me by Chris that you saw at the start of the video, his family, whenever they were renovating the house. And the thought occurred to me that if I was to cut the old copper boiler from being a cylinder back into being stock material, I should be able to get enough flattened out material to actually make a heat shield to go between Percy and the bulkhead. So it was out with the engineer's butter knife and start carving. It's the first time I've ever actually cut up a copper boiler, and I don't know what I was expecting to be on the inside, but there was literally nothing, which surprised me immensely. So, plasma cutter, like a hot knife through butter. All I had to do was take a couple of measurements of what size I needed the copper sheet to be, and off we go. And I know, so many of you don't try this at home without safety gear and snowflakes and Savlon and a first aid kit at the hand. I'm an old school engineer, guys. I don't believe in safety equipment as much as safety equipment is. Well, if you don't have the safety equipment there, you tend not to make a lot of mistakes. Or at least that's how it's worked so far. Anyway, as I say, I don't recommend it. But meanwhile, back on board. At this point, Percy is, well, quite literally just sitting on a fabricated stool type contraption. Because obviously Percy's heavy enough not to go falling about the place. Gravity has that kind of effect of keeping him in place for now. So the idea was bring the copper plate down, put the heat shield in behind Percy, and also put a copper plate below Percy, and then drill down through. And that little cabinet you can see directly beneath Percy here. So the plate, the blanking plate on the top is welded to a scaffolding bar, basically, for to go up to act as a chimney. And the blanking plate that's clamped and collared below has two holes in it to put bolts through into the cabinet below so that he can't fall about. And with that, it was time to actually give Percy a bit of a test run. And it was unbelievable. Now, I know those of you in modern cruising cats wouldn't be thinking in the same direction as I am, but I'm in Ireland and UK waters where summer's on a Wednesday and the rest of the time it's bloody freezing. To actually be able to sit on board with a Potbelly stove providing silent heat just adds an atmosphere that's absolutely beautiful. And of course, as you know from previous episodes, we do have the diesel carb heater. And then I decided to get torn into something that is long, long overdue, which was to put a diffuser over the lights that I have in the center of the ceiling. And those LED lights work on a remote for the colored ones, and then there's the LED strip that runs up the center that's connected to the two outside LED strips that are over the two walkways in the hulls. And I wanted to add a switch so that when those main lights are on, it's optional to be able to have all on, but still be able to turn off the central one, as you can see here, that's over the table. So quite a bit of light over the table. We have this ribbon LED, we have the 4 strip color LEDs, and then we have the 6 overhead spotlights. So when it comes to using the central table as a chart table, I definitely think I can see in the dark. It's a distinct possibility. Now, since we're this far into the video, a trigger warning. I've mentioned this before, I think in episode 3, that the demographics for the channel and the analytics show that the StormDancer viewership is in the majority male between the ages of 45 to 65 plus. Therefore, at a guess, there's more than a few of our subscribers that have been through a few rough times in their life and maybe a few dependencies. Now, I promised Chris, who you saw at the start of the video, that I would give him a little bit of support to launch his own channel. Chris is a recovering alcoholic. And when I say he's a recovering alcoholic, Chris, as you can see here at the end of a rope, is now pulling on it. And you can read into that what you wish. Algorithm. When Chris reached out to me, he was suffering from the depths of despair. Alcohol-driven psychosis, and I have worked closely in supporting him to get him through the DTs on 6 separate occasions. He has only just reached the conviction this time to stay off and launched his own YouTube channel. And, well, folks, I promised I would show it.
In over 10 years, say 12 years now, the most I've went off alcohol through the help of yourself. I couldn't have done it ever. I wouldn't even considered going off alcohol, and you didn't dictate me and go, you have to do this. Son, you need to stop drinking. It's got you nowhere. 100% correct. Guidance, father figure energy. 30 days sober is the most I've ever been in my adult life. If that's not pathetic, I don't know what is. And I want to smash that. See that brick wall of all that demons and driving and all the destruction and the amount that's held me back. Have I anyone to blame for that? No. Yeah, a wee bit of rough childhood and demons from the past and this and that. You drink, most people drink the blank things out for a quick fix. Quick fix is what turns into years and years. No. Have I anyone to blame for being an alcoholic? Absolutely not. Is there factors there? Is there factors, contributing factors? Yeah. As an adult, I chose to drink. I chose to hit the bottle. Do I want to fucking do it anymore? Well, I'm choosing to rebel and stand back, because Everyone's getting older. I want to stop this bullshit, and I'm doing it, and it's not easy. I've slipped back 6 times now, George, as you know, man. 7th significance in it.
You know, I've made it so many times on your path to sobriety absolutely clear that I will not tolerate you drunk in my presence.
Yeah.
And if you want to drink, you're on your own.
100%. And I
know
totally agree with it.
I know there's so many people that will be watching the channel think that that's harsh, but I want to share this with you.
Yep.
I grew up in a seaside town where if you were drunk on a Saturday night, you could have got jumped and mugged and it was on yourself. Or
because you put yourself into that position, exactly, which is irresponsible.
It's about responsibility.
Yeah, it's irresponsible.
And I've told you that over the years in my life that I've been through a lot of tough times, and there was nobody there to make it easier, except that you've got to man up,
toughen up, and
work your way through, be independent of
learn the hard way, basically.
The triggers. Now, as you know, I'm not a drinker, but I've shared this with you.
No, I know that, yeah. Some people.
For those of you with an affinity to Chris's journey, he can be found on YouTube under Christopher A. 1987. And that small snippet is from the beginning of a very educational and heartfelt podcast-style interview with me on StormDancer. Until next time, folks, stay safe and believe in the magic of your dreams.